So, John baptizes Jesus with water, the same stuff we've been craving this long, hot week. Water from a hose, in a pool, in a river, the sea. We want to be by or in the water. And while Jesus is praying after his baptism, after the heavens have opened and the Holy Spirit has descended upon him, this is what God says to him. You are my Son, the beloved. With you I am well pleased. This is what God says to each one of us in this gospel reading. You are mine, my beloved. I am well pleased with you. That's it. All of the good news, all packaged up in one statement, God's statement to Jesus. You are beloved. So I could just end my sermon there and sit down, but I'll go on. It is the first sermon after my ordination as deacon, after all. So Helen gave me, because it's my first sermon after my ordination, leave to indulge myself a little today, make my sermon perhaps a little more personal than I might otherwise. Break some rules, because you're really not meant to do that. So here's my take on living life as God's beloved. Luke's telling of Jesus' baptism leads us to the baptism liturgy in the New Zealand prayer book, where the first statement in the liturgy is, God is love, God gives us life. We love because God first loves us. In baptism, God declares that love. In Christ, God calls us to respond. It takes us straight to the heart of baptism's meaning. Baptism is about God's love for us. It signals that we are beloved and God is well pleased with us, just as we are. And for me, this understanding that I'm beloved of God is at the heart of my faith and my life. Over time, it's become anchored deep within me, a real bodily sense of being held in love, a gentle, expansive, and tender love, a freeing love. And that sense of being beloved is central to my call to ordination. So that sounds pretty simple, right? But it's taken me a long time to get a grip on this, and I'm still working on it. For a long time, everyone else could be God's beloved. That was fine, but it couldn't possibly be true of me. Some of you will know this series of books, Where's Wally? The endless search for the guy in the red striped t-shirt and hidden somewhere in those very busy drawings. Well, my search for God was a bit like looking for Wally in these books. It was endless and it was painful, but occasionally there were moments of insight and joy when you found Wally. So far from living as if I was beloved of God, often I lived my life looking for ways to make myself beloved, trying to fashion myself as deserving, looking for ways to save myself, basically. I was big on pulling myself up by my own bootstraps, relying on my resources and efforts, and I was really big on perfectionism too, and measuring myself against a failure, against impossibly high standards. Something to do with getting stuck in that black and white letter of the law developmental phase, and not seeing past the literal words into their meaning at a heart level. Something of being a lawyer was about that too, I think. But coming to that sense of being beloved of God is like coming back down to earth. It's like coming back home, like finding my centre. So I suspect that you all know a bit about living life as if you can save yourself too, because we all do it. I still catch myself doing it. Sewing the stole I'm wearing today, writing this sermon, I could feel the pressure for them to be perfect. At work, drafting a contract, trying to have 20/20 vision, and I'm back to my bootstraps really quickly. So I don't rest in this beautiful sense of belovedness endlessly. I don't find myself thinking that all is joy and bliss all of the time, but I do find myself returning to that sense of being God's beloved more and more quickly, resting in its warmth more of the time, feeling that assurance and freedom in the core of my being. And I'm sure that I couldn't have responded to my call to ordination, which I had felt for many, many years, since a 9-year-old at a serving rehearsal at the cathedral said to me out of the blue, "Are you going to be a priest?" That would never have occurred to me previously, but I couldn't have responded to that call without coming to some understanding and some sense of that belovedness. The reading from Isaiah tells us about this belovedness too. We're created and formed by God, precious in God's sight, and God is with us when we pass through the waters. We will not be overwhelmed when we pass through the rivers, or burnt when we walk through fire, and the flame shall not consume us. In these verses, Isaiah tells us where we come from and who we are. He points us to the source of our life and comfort. We belong to and are treasured by God. God has called us by name. We are God's. We and our world are the subjects of God's love. We live connected to and in union with God, every one of us. And everything flows from that sense of belovedness: love, compassion, tenderness, joy, freedom. It opens our hearts to ourselves, but more importantly, to others and to the world. Living as God's beloved expands us, enriches us, challenges us, and makes us braver than we ever thought we could be. With God's love for us seated in our beings, we can treasure others. We can treasure the environment. We can see further, deeper, and live stronger. And if that's true of us as God's beloved, then that must be true of everyone else. They too are God's beloved, and that has to be the most incredible thing. Suddenly we have to see the world in a different way. In his baptism by John, Jesus is witness in himself to the transcendent love of God in the world. He points to the creative presence of God in the world and in each of us, in everyone and everything that surrounds us, to the new hearts and eyes we are given through baptism. For this is the gift the water of baptism brings us, the cooling, gentle water of God's love poured out and washing over us, all of us, forever. Clean water, a new heart, a new spirit, a coming back home and down to earth. The water of baptism makes real the grace of God's love for us, unearned, undeserved, poured out and over us, finding us, forming us, and reforming us. So when we hear God telling Jesus in this gospel, "You are my Son, the beloved, with you I am well pleased," my prayer is that we hear God saying the same thing to us, telling us, "You are my children, my beloved, with you I am well pleased." Amen.